Welcome to Careers Unwrapped, where we delve into real-life career stories from successful people who've been through it all, the ups and the downs. We'll get their raw, honest, actionable advice and be the careers talk they wish they'd had when they started out. As someone who has had a varied career, from soldier to salesman, expedition leader to entrepreneur, he knows firsthand that your career doesn't always lead you where you expect it to. Here's your host, Mark Fawcett.
On today's episode of Careers Unwrapped, we're joined by Emma Keller. Emma's a real trailblazer in sustainability with a wealth of experience across both industry, academia, and also the non-profit sector. She currently serves as the head of sustainability at Nestlé, where she drives strategies to really enhance food system sustainability on a global scale. Previously, she shaped food initiatives at WWF, huge global charity, and also spearheaded sustainability research at Unilever. She's also got a PhD in sustainability and I believe a real personal commitment to environmental advocacy. So we're going to try and delve into her journey, uncover the insights she's garnered from leading change in some of these very influential global organizations. So Emma, welcome.
Hi, Mark. Lovely to be with you today.
I think, first of all, I'm really interested over the career you've had so far. What's really changed in how businesses view sustainability, let's say over the last decade?
Yes, I think businesses have really changed their view on sustainability quite substantially. I remember when I started way back when, I think some businesses were starting to take it really seriously, but for many, it was a nice to have. It's starting to see a bit of pressure that, we need to be doing positive things. We need to be having a bit more of a positive impact. And back then it was even called CSR. It was corporate social responsibility. And it was set up as a separate little team that was trying to do nice things for the business. And I think we've come a long way since then, where businesses are now really recognizing that being sustainable and doing more to be sustainable throughout their whole end-to-end value chain is actually part of business survival. They simply won't exist as a business in the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years in many cases. And a company like Nestlé, the company I work for now, has been around for nearly over 150 years. They see it as absolute, it's important for survival. So it's gone on a long journey. There's huge numbers of topics that have ebbed and flowed, but it's really changed.
And it's one of those terms that everyone thinks, I've heard of sustainability, but what does it actually cover? How do you break it down into either separate topics or separate areas of business?
I think that's one of the challenges for a sustainability professional today, is that it can encompass almost everything. And you'll hear the word sustainability bounded around in lots of different topics, in lots of different areas. But really what it means is looking at both the environmental piece, which I think is where people's mind goes to instantly. It's about the planet impacts, but it's also that social impact. What impact are we having on communities and on people? But thirdly, it's really that economic piece as well. Anything we do has got to be economically sustainable. And when you bring those three together, kind of people, planet, and profit, that's when you're really addressing sustainability. And more, we're also, particularly on that people space, we're seeing the health agenda come into this, because we can't have a healthy planet without healthy people.
And you mentioned there the economic side. Is there sometimes a conflict between sustainability issues perhaps focused on improving the environment or reducing negative impacts on the environment, and a business's need to drive profit, drive value for shareholders?
There's always a conflict when it comes to these areas, but generally there's a really positive way through when we do come together and really look at the issue as a whole. I think at the beginning, it can, in many cases, look like sustainability costs more money because you have to invest in new projects or change business models or do things differently, and that can have a business cost. But what we're starting to see more and more is that it's not actually a cost. Really, it's an investment. It's an investment in the future resilience, the future reputation, and the future direction of travel of your business. So I think seeing that narrative shift from sustainability being a cost center to sustainability being an investment for future success is a really important shift that we're seeing more and more.
It chimes with what I've seen a lot of in my main business, We Are Futures, over the last 20 years, when some of our early work was for clients' little team in the corner of the building with the CSR who said, we do the good bits while everyone else gets on and does the business. And now it's just much more integrated into the DNA of organizations. It's now how you do business rather than something you do on the side of doing your business.
And it completely has to be. Absolutely. I think there's no business that would say that just the sustainability team can deliver on the massive, ambitious sustainability commitments that most businesses have made. Really, it's got to be embedded into everybody's job. And I think that's one of the main challenges, but also exciting opportunities of sustainability at the moment is how do you get everybody, whether they sit in IT or HR or supply chain or wherever they are in the business, to be seeing how can be helping make the business more sustainable, can be using their role to be a force for good and have a better impact. And that's one of my favorite parts of my job at the moment is engaging and working with colleagues across the business, some who care deeply and it's something in their heart, some who care because they've looked at the numbers and they understand that this is really important for the future financials of the organization, and others that have seen this stuff for themselves and really want to get stuck in and do something. And when you bring that heart, mind, and hands together, you've really hit on something powerful.
Well, can we perhaps bring it to life then with something very real and on the ground, rather than the big picture of sustainability across something as huge as Nestlé? What's a project in your in tray at the moment or a piece of work that your team are actually doing that is starting to now make a difference?
There's so many. And I guess the first thing to say is sustainability doesn't happen overnight. It's often a lot of work, a lot of conversations, a lot of trying to find ideas and look at collaborations and partnerships, because no one company can really deliver on sustainability initiatives alone. So it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of resilience, it takes a lot of talking to get things done. And I think also the second thing quickly to say on that is no one has all the answers yet. No one yet has reached net zero emissions or has sourced all of their ingredients responsibly, or has tackled some of the societal and social issues they're facing. So we're still learning as we go. But some of the projects that most excite me at the moment are particularly our projects working with farmers. So as Nestlé, we're a food business, so we depend on nature to be resilient and to be thriving if we want to source the ingredients that make up our delicious food products that we all eat every day. So working with farmers to change their behaviours is really, really important. But it's not easy. The average age of a farmer in the UK is 59 years old. They've been farming potentially the same way their father or their grandfather farmed. And so we're trying to work with a population of farmers to try and get them to do something differently. And in some areas, we're pushing on an open door. They're really keen. They've got their own brilliant ideas and they're really up for it. And in other areas, it's really challenging. So an exciting project we're working on at the moment is at a landscape scale. So we're looking at big, massive areas where there are many, many different farms, many other different uses of that land. And we're working collaboratively with others to kind of incentivize those farmers through financial means to change their behaviors. So how can we reward them for putting more bird boxes in and attracting nature, or changing the way they plow their fields with different machinery or different technology, or using cover crops to keep their soil covered in winter when it would normally be bare. And this is a really exciting initiative that is starting to bear fruit, because as we've all seen, it's basically rained since October and these farmers have been in real trouble. So we're starting to see these farmers being much more resilient in the face of the oncoming climate change impacts.
And so if this project pushes ahead for the next few years, what's going to be better in, let's say, 5 years than it is now? What changes will actually have happened?
So we should see multiple different benefits. I think the first is that there's a real risk of farmers not wanting to farm anymore, because it's a really difficult job and it's not particularly well paying if yields aren't what they used to be. So we want to see farmers have a better livelihood and income. Second thing really is about being able to secure the ingredients we need to make the products we want. We all remember during COVID when products were missing from our shelves, or even last year when we couldn't get hold of lettuces and tomatoes were in short supply. We want to make sure ingredients can still be available. And that's going to be something we'll see as this project evolves. And also we'll be able to create new, healthy, delicious, innovative new products by looking at different ways of sourcing ingredients and making products more exciting.
So let's just go back then to the start of your journey. What first sparked a passion or an interest? Was it a particular experience or realization? What got you started down this route?
So I grew up in London, very urban, inner city kid, and I moved to Ireland in my kind of very early teens and spent quite a lot of years in Ireland, where I lived in my grandparents' farm, and suddenly I was exposed to huge areas of nature, working on the farm, helping my grandparents, and just completely fell in love with it. Really learned for the first time where my food came from, and then even more appreciated how difficult it was to get that food from the field onto the plate. And that was something that just fascinated me. Of course, I grew up with the voice of David Attenborough in my ear and watched documentaries by all the famous documentary makers we know and love. And I think that's just instilled in me a real passion to want to protect nature and to play my role every day in making sure we do that for the future. And I think the reason I came to work for a company like Nestlé is even on a tough day or a day where I'm stuck in Excel spreadsheets or PowerPoint decks, I know that everything I'm trying to do is trying to help the company to be better so that we can protect nature for us today, but also for future generations to come.
Now, you've worked for two of the world's biggest companies in terms of Unilever and now Nestlé. But in between those, you work for WWF, so a huge global organization, but a charity, sometimes I think seen as very much on the other side of the fence from big corporate. So what was the difference you found working within an organization like WWF?
So it was exactly that. I worked for Unilever, who are the makers of things like lots of ice cream products, lots of home and personal care products, and really learned how the inner mechanics of a business works and the opportunities they have to deliver change. And decided after that, I wanted to go and exactly as you say, be on the other side of the fence where I could talk to businesses in a different way and push them to go a bit further. So going into WWF was an amazing experience. I could be spending time out in the Brazilian Amazon talking to farmers who maybe had been linked to deforestation in the past and now were changing their ways. Then I would spend time out in India talking to cotton farmers that were struggling to make a living and looking at how we could source that sustainable cotton and bring it into UK value chains and working with big businesses like Marks and Spencer's and many others. So it was a really fantastic place to work. Huge exposure to a whole range of businesses and also massive exposure to government. How we could talk to policymakers to help businesses continue to be a force for good and to go even further by leveling the playing field and making sure that all businesses need to be moving in the same direction.
And where was the balance in that sort of role at that time at WF between showing businesses better ways to do stuff, in other words, helping them, and instead putting pressure on them and pushing them to go harder and to go faster? Where's the balance between support and pressure?
Yeah, it's a fine line and it was always a mix. Sometimes I'd have businesses knocking on my door because they had just been the victim of Greenpeace campaign or another high profile NGO were throwing stones at them. And they'd come knocking on our door and say, help, we know we need to do better. Someone's shown us the issue we've got and we want to do something differently. And it was quite easy. We could sit down, look together at what the solutions were. And for others, it was even just letting them know that they had an issue that they haven't yet identified and that there was a serious risk to their business. And we had to put a bit of pressure on. I remember one particular meeting in London many years ago, talking to a whole range of businesses. And I brought with me a Brazilian colleague and we were talking about eliminating deforestation from their supply chain. And they were all really struggling to do it because it's such a complex issue, but they were committed to work together to do it. And I remember with my colleague, we started challenging them to not just look at deforestation, but actually look at the conversion or the destruction of any habitat, not just forests, but grasslands and other things. I remember two of the businesses just walked out of the room and refused to talk to us for the rest of the day because they said, it's too difficult to do this. How can we expect it to do that? A year later, those same businesses organised a massive event, invited us along and wanted to talk about habitat conversion. So it just shows that sometimes you put a bit of pressure on and then gradually it's those businesses themselves that want to drive that change. So there's always a fine line, but pressure is still part of the mix.
That's a nice example of actually the balance that has a positive outcome. But what about frustrations when you were working there? What were the sort of things that led you sort of putting your head in your hands or shouting? What were the things that just annoyed you in that environment?
It could be very frustrating. I think when you work for one of the world's biggest environmental NGOs, WWF, World Wildlife Fund, it's all about protecting nature and creating a planet where people and nature can thrive together. And you want to see businesses doing the best they can for that. And sometimes you knew a business could go a bit further, but they weren't really willing to, or at that time they weren't able to make the business case. And I guess that's really what led me to decide it was time to move on from WWF and join Nestlé. I wanted to go back into a business where I could be right at the decision-making table and actually then part of that team who was trying to drive change from the inside. And that's kind of what's led me here. And it's been fantastic. There's been so many exciting projects we've been involved in. Another I quickly wanted to talk about as well was an exciting project on packaging. I think many of our viewers will be familiar with some packaging changes we've seen in many products. One of our exciting ones recently was changing our quality street packaging from double layered kind of layers of plastic and foil into paper-based packaging. And that takes years in the making. There's lots of research and development that goes into it to make sure the material is safe and it can hold the product for as long as we need it to be able to sit on a shelf and get to a consumer's home, and how to make it as appealing to consumers as possible. We learned a lot in that project. And I think we've had challenges because we've had consumers come back to us and say, you've taken the magic out of Christmas. You've taken away the sparkle. But what is great is other consumers then come to our defense and say, actually, if we want a sparkly planet in the future, we need to make changes like this. So it's been really interesting to see how these things are responded to. But ultimately, I think we've got to move in that direction, but we've still got to make it as appealing for consumers as possible.
And what about cultural differences in terms of working in WWF, working inside a large global business? How did you find the cultural change?
Yeah, working in an NGO, the culture, an environmental NGO, the culture was fantastic in that everybody there believed in the cause. So you never had to make your argument for why you should be doing things sustainably. I guess the challenge was there's so many ways to save the planet. So the tension we would have there was which issue to focus on first. Is it deforestation or water or agriculture, or which places in the world we want to focus our limited resources on protecting? Is it rhino habitat? Is it forest habitat? What might it be? And I think that was a lot of the culture there. But generally, it was about how do we as a collective drive change and encourage businesses and governments to go further. And then going into a business, of course, it's very different because the business exists to make a profit and to make money and to deliver for shareholders, but it also has a really strong purpose. Businesses exist to have a role in the world and to delight and provide consumers with products that they need and that they love. And I think going into that business environment where you've got to really understand that business model, but then where you can link it with sustainability, you've really found a sweet spot there. And I think that's what's really exciting about sustainability today is we're seeing that more and more, that business purpose is linked with sustainability.
Now, I do a lot of work myself with what we might call emerging adults, so sort of 16 to 22-year-olds thinking about where their career direction is going to take them. And one thing that's really clear is that this emerging generation places corporate positive impact or sustainability or CSR, if you might have still called it that. They place that on a much higher threshold of importance in terms of something that they're looking for. So if you were giving advice to those sort of career starters who were thinking, actually, I want to not just work for a business that does good, I want to be part of the having a positive impact, I want to move into sustainability, what should they perhaps be thinking about or reading or looking at? What advice would you give to people thinking, I want to head in the sort of direction that Emma's gone in?
Yeah, and I'm seeing this a lot. Any of our new starters or people we're interviewing to join the business, one of the first questions they're asking us is, what are you guys doing on sustainability? Is your business genuinely committed to making the world a better place and being a force for good? So it's absolutely happening. I think for anyone starting in this space, be curious. There's so many incredible books and documentaries out there on all sorts of channels, on Netflix, on BBC, etc., that you can watch to really understand the issues. So be curious, ask those questions. I think the other really important thing is that there isn't a single career path into sustainability. And that's really the beauty of it. In my team, I need communications experts that can help us to communicate these challenges and the exciting work we're doing to a whole bunch of different audiences. I also need data experts that can help me crunch the numbers, look at where our hotspots are and understand where can we really make a difference. I need political kind of people who are really interested in how you change policy and how you change the hearts and minds of leaders in business and in political arenas. But I also need a whole bunch of other different skill sets. So there isn't one single path. Ask the questions. And I think one of the things that I've really seen in sustainability is you have to be willing to be a bit uncomfortable with uncertainty, because this is all a new terrain. We're figuring it out as we go. We're learning every single day, but also uncomfortable with sometimes asking the challenging questions. I know sometimes I turn up in a room and I can see some people be a bit like, what's she going to say? Is she going to completely knock down my project? Is she going to make it more expensive? Because our job is to really push the business to do things differently. So you've got to be uncomfortable with that discomfort.
You're almost giving an image there, an unfair image, I would say, but an image of a bunch of very corporate suits in a room planning how to make a lot of money. And then you go, oh, Emma's walked in. It's all suddenly going to get harder to do this. And it brings me on to now I think is interesting, which is that of leadership. So you have to be a leader in your role. You have to influence other people. And I wonder if you can reflect on how you have developed your own style of leadership and influence and what you're better at now that maybe you weren't when you started out.
Yeah. And I think we all go on a personal journey of leadership. And I'm continuing to do that all the time as I continue to learn and have situations that don't go as well as I'd hoped and think, what could I have done better? I think for me, it's about a few things. I think I've learned to really try and meet people where they are. So really understanding who is it that I'm trying to convince to do something differently? Where are they today? And where is it that I'd like them to get to? And how big is that gap? Because I've had experiences where I've gone in, tried to convince someone of reaching for the stars when actually they were only ready to reach for the moon. And it could turn them off instantly, but trying to understand where they are and how you can help them get there. And what I've really learned as well is how to see sustainability as a problem solver. So now if I see one of my leadership team, my director of HR or my director of sales, and they've got a challenge, for HR, maybe, we're struggling to engage our people or want to build more pride in the organization, I'll use sustainability as a motivator, saying, well, look, we know our employees really care about what we do as a business. Let's tell more sustainability stories, or let's organize employee volunteering where people can get out into nature and do something good. So sustainability can be a problem solver. Similar for sales, it may be we're struggling to get through to a particular customer. Again, how can we use sustainability to say, look, well, they've committed to this. We can show them that our products are helping to deliver on their commitments and we can do this together. So absolutely using it as a problem solver. And then I think also just being nice and being kind is very basic, but we've all got our own agendas. Nobody wants to destroy the planet or do bad things. We all ultimately want to do good. So I think being really kind, being really collaborative and looking at where we can do something together is really important. And lastly, having fun. This stuff is hard. It's challenging. It can give all of us sleepless nights. So you've got to have fun with it. You've got to laugh when it goes a bit wrong, learn from it and try and make sure you have a good time.
Yeah, you're describing to me there a form of leadership, which it almost feels like gentle. And I hope I'm using that word in the right way. It's sometimes subtle, it's influencing, it's collaborative, it's listening. And so that's a style of leadership or an approach to leadership that you've developed over time that works for the type of work that you need to do. As opposed to, imagine, some people who were, you mentioned Greenpeace earlier, they're obviously a lot more out there and confrontational, and that's how they're trying to achieve their objectives. I always find the difference in approach to leadership really interesting because I've been in very, very different leadership situations, from being in the military for a bit, from leading mountain and jungle expeditions in South America, leading a tech startup. And each time you have to approach it differently. But also you said about meeting people where they are. And so much of it is I need to achieve something. I have to achieve it with the people around me. Therefore, I've got to have an understanding of where each of those people are right now before I can really think about how I'm going to take them to where I hope to get to. And just adding another sort of part of your development and career journey in, you spent quite a lot of time in academia. I think degree, master's, and doctorate. So, how have you found that level of academic study and time has played into the way that you work now?
Yeah, I think my academic background has given me a really good discipline to be able to really understand the data, the impacts, and kind of assess and analyze that data and chart a course forward. And that's really important for building a strategy when things are so uncertain and we're trying to look into the future and look at what's to come. I also think it's definitely helped in my role to give that credibility, because even just going in with the title Dr. Emma Keller, people are like, oh, okay, you must know what you're talking about in some way. So it does help with that credibility. I don't think you need a PhD to go into sustainability for people that are starting out in that. If there are people that are really passionate about particular areas and they want to go and study that, then absolutely it's a fantastic route. But yeah, it's really given me that ability to kind of juggle those areas, I think. And that's why having that academic, that NGO experience and the business experience has really helped me to be able to try and lead and drive this agenda forward, because it gives that rigor, that influencing skills and that ability to see the broad brush, and then also understanding how a business works and how they're motivated.
Now, another part of your life I understand is you're racing. You're being an athlete very much. I believe you've done 4 marathons or maybe more, triathlons, also an Ironman. Why are they still called Ironman? Surely it is time to change that. But anyway, you do a lot of these very much endurance type athletic sports. And where does that sort of fit into your life? How important is that to you in making up who you are?
Yeah, hugely important. And more so now, it's long walks with my dog. I think part of it is it's that time out in nature, that uninterrupted time out in nature where you've got nothing else to do but look at your surroundings and try and get through the endurance event that you're doing. But also it's a really important time for me to do my thinking and my processing. One of the challenges of working in sustainability is you almost know too much of the perils of the future of the planet and some of the challenges that we're facing. And that can be really, really overwhelming. And we're seeing that with a lot of particularly young people, but people across all ages. Once you know too much, it can be quite intimidating. So having that time to get out of your head, to challenge your body, but also to be outside in nature is super important for me to process and think about what I do next.
Yeah, that getting away from the desk, even sometimes getting away from your team, and whether it's running or walking, swimming, cycling a bike, although perhaps not getting too distracted on that. But all of those, I find that's the moment you need to just take a breath and think, is there a new angle for this? And maybe some inspiration will come where you can chew over a problem. Although I do suspect that when you're reaching the end of an Ironman, perhaps your mind is not focused entirely on sustainability challenges at Nestlé right now.
You've let go of that a little bit. Yeah.
We're about survival and finishing at that point. And you mentioned looking to the future there. And so just do that for a moment. Imagine it's 10 years from now, and either you're giving or listening to a presentation at Nestlé saying, this is the difference we've made over the last 10 years. What would you want the title, the front page to be in a decade from now at Nestlé, saying, this is the changes and improvements we have delivered in this last 10 years?
Great question. Big question. Something we think about a lot as a team. There isn't really a single headline, I guess, but more a kind of Nestlé has led from the front or driven the charge in making our food systems more resilient. And I think that is something that Nestlé, as the world's biggest food and drink company, can really do and should really do. And that is something we're absolutely striving for. So what I would love to see stories about how we have helped bring nature back to the UK. The UK is one of the most nature depleted countries on earth. So what role can we play in bringing that back? I'd like to see stories about how we've stopped plastic pollution going into our oceans every year and the role we've driven on avoiding littering, but also changing packaging to be much more sustainable. And I'd love to see stories about how we've supported farmers to farm differently, to farm more innovatively, and to protect our rural countrysides. And I think if we could achieve some of those things, that would be an amazing feat. I guess one other project quickly I'll mention is we've just started to look to the future. We've started reverse mentoring. This is where we have some of our youngest, most passionate colleagues on sustainability who are actually mentoring our most senior, typically a lot older leaders across the business, including our CEO, bringing together this young, passionate person with our more senior stakeholder. And the younger people being the mentors on sustainability has been game-changing for the business. We've seen them really challenging the business to say, well, why did you make that decision? Have you thought about it like this? This is what me and my friends talk about in the pub. This is what we care about. And we're starting to see these results really change the way our senior leaders are thinking, which is fantastic for us as a business, but also really empowering for our younger colleagues who really care deeply about these issues.
And on a related but more personal level, what legacy do you hope to leave in not just the field of sustainability, but in the wider impact on the areas that sustainability is looking? What do you personally want to leave as a legacy?
I think for me personally, it's about knowing that every day when I turned up at work with my team, we helped change the hearts and minds of somebody in the business. And every day, if you can influence one person, you're starting to really create that kind of glow across the whole organization to have everybody moving in the same direction. So I think the biggest legacy we can have as sustainability people is, yes, lots of projects that we've convinced the business to invest in, hopefully lots of nature restored, lots of carbon emissions removed, lots of packaging changes. But I think really if we can change the mindset and the psyche of a business, then we've done our job. So that would be most important for me.
Emma, we could go on for ages here because I just find it so interesting, and I'd love to delve deeper into how big companies are balancing the potential sometimes conflict between profit and positive impact. But it's really clear your passion for the work shines through. And also for anybody listening, you said earlier that there are so many career paths into this, whether it's the science side, the political, the comms, the data, the management of all of this. There'll be production elements too as well. There's so many things in this particular area. But I think one thing that really struck me was what you said about being curious. And if you're thinking about you want to be in sustainability or you want to move into roles that affect sustainability more, then be willing to be uncomfortable and be curious, I think are two really clear and pertinent, strong messages to take away. So Emma, thank you so much for joining us, for unwrapping your career to date, both past, present and ambitions for the future. It's been fantastic having you on. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Lovely to chat.
This podcast is sponsored by We Are Futures. To find out more about We Are Futures and how we can introduce your brand, business or organisation to the mass markets of tomorrow, visit www.wearefutures.com. Make sure to search for Careers Unwrapped in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Remember to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at We Are Futures, thanks for listening.